Woo! All right. First tip, buy a saxophone. All right, what you're going to want to do, folks. Top 5 tips, game-changing production tips. Number 1, buy a saxophone. All right. Today is Producer Tip Tuesday, and today's topic is about beat block, how to overcome the feeling of I don't know where to start, and 7 tips for making music when you're feeling uninspired, making music when you don't feel like making music. Number 1 is theory and technique. So the idea here is kind of like mechanically coming up with some inspiration. I say mechanically because when I think of theory and technique, I'm thinking of like playing piano. So it could be a new scale, it could be a new style of chord, it could be a new cadence with chord progressions. Finding something new for you to learn, maybe something you've been meaning to learn, or something just totally new, something you've heard in a song, but just spending time with it in practice and then letting that practice turn into making a new beat is something that I've found to be really beneficial. And I don't even really think of it in the same way that I think of making a beat from scratch usually. Instead, I think of it as kind of like a applied practice scenario. You know, I'm practicing a scale, I'm practicing a new scale, like maybe like melodic minor scale, something I was working on the other day. And I decide, oh, that sounds cool. Let's see if I can make a beat with it. I think I can make a melody out of this that would work well. And then from there, you know, you're off to the races and you start to fill in the gaps with everything else that you're usually comfortable with. But just by starting from a slightly uncomfortable starting point, a little bit of a fresh starting point, it gives you some new perspective. Thinking about it in terms of mechanically discovering an idea, as opposed to having an idea in your head that you're like, I want to go for this sound. Starting just mechanically and physically discovering, like you're mining for gold, like you're panning for gold. That's one of the most satisfying ways to do it. And also something I think it's very difficult for you to run out of new things to do in terms of theory, in terms of scales, in terms of chords. So you could always come up with something new. For rhythm, on the rhythm side, because I'm talking about chords and melodies and things like that, on the rhythm side, you could do new time signatures. You could also try specific cadences and like clave rhythms, so certain specific named rhythms like samba, bossa nova, different types of swing on the rhythm side could drive you in a new direction. Say if you're feeling blocked and you're feeling uninspired when it comes to your drum patterns. Number 2 is really simple, recycling. And this can tie in with works in progress. So beats that you haven't finished yet, beats that are just kind of lying on your computer, waiting to be finished, as well as beats that you may have abandoned a long time ago, those really old ones. There was something in there that sparked your creativity and made you want to continue making it. And listening to that whole beat now, you're probably like, wow, this is trash. But there's probably something in there, some layer, some phrase, some little bit that you could take out and use to start a new beat. And this is something I think that just gets easier over time because you have more perspective on like, what was I doing with that one thing right there? This would be good if only I did this slightly differently. You could also just pull things from a loop pack. I think of that as recycling because you're recycling someone else's ideas. There's nothing wrong with using loops. So I think if you haven't been using loops and you feel stuck, definitely use some loops. And if there's ones that you made, great. If they're ones that somebody else made, even better. It's such an overlooked kind of way of going about things, but yeah, use every part. Nothing goes to waste. We have to be very environmentally friendly, ecologically friendly in the way that we produce music. Number 3, change of approach. So this is kind of getting into the more abstract side of things. Starting from a new place is kind of how I think of this. Change of approach means going away from what you normally do in a very intentional way. So if I always start with drums, then today I'm starting with melody. If I always start with a sample, today I'm starting from a blank project. If I usually start with instrumental, maybe I could download an acapella off of YouTube or someplace and build a beat around that. So just changing the starting point that you usually come from. A lot of people have their preferred methods and it may feel very odd. A lot of people start from their drums. It may feel very odd to start with a melody or start with chords, but that uncomfortability is what you're kind of seeking out when you're doing this, because the reason why you're blocked is partially because you're in between being too comfortable and not wanting to expand. The way that beat block works for me a lot of times is like disconnect between what I know I should do and what I actually want to do. And so sometimes just finding a way to make something that may have become boring or may have become normal to make it turn into something exciting or just slightly different. You could also extend this into like, if you're usually working on your own music, you could try remixing something. If you're usually not sampling, try sampling. Just whatever you're doing, try to do the opposite of it. Try to flip it somehow. The order of how you add things to your beats, switch things up. Number 4 is really simple. Change of scenery. Do your stuff somewhere else. I know a lot of us have like a space, whether it's big or small. I'm very fortunate to have a nice space here where I can work solely on music. I'm very fortunate to have this space, but even so, we can all become a little bit complacent, especially after we've been making music for a while. We have a dedicated space, we have a dedicated way of doing things. So change of scenery can force us to maybe try to see what we can do without our normal things. You could take your laptop to the park if that's possible. If you use a desktop, this might be a lot more difficult, but yeah, just changing where you're at is really a simple but effective way to kickstart your creativity, because you're just dealing with a new environment. I think that creativity is all about how you absorb information from your life and the place that you're in, the environment around you, and you recycle that into your creativity, into your creative outlet. So by removing yourself from your usual environment is one of the easiest ways to just kickstart that cycle in a new direction. And kind of going along with that, in a similar vein, number 5 is use different tools. So these might actually be the same thing at the end of the day, because if you took your laptop to the park, you're not going to have your controller or your monitors or your synthesizer or your guitars or whatever tools you have that you usually use. So that's one way that it can tie in. But using different tools also means maybe you usually use one particular plugin to do a certain job. And it could be something really simple, like change up which EQ plugin you use, or it could be something like RC20 is pretty popular as a plugin. A lot of people probably don't know what every single module does of that plugin. So if you took some time to, say like, oh, I never use this magnetic channel, this magnetic module within the plugin. Let me just like try to mess with that today. Things like that. Similarly, if it's a virtual instrument, I think that's especially relevant. Instead of trying to make do with a preset, try to sound design from scratch, or try to find features in the user interface that you're not familiar with and try to figure out what they do and try to make use of them to make a sound. Those can be really simple but effective ways to, again, kickstart your creativity. We're concerned with getting the ball rolling in terms of your creative process and how you're making music. And because that it can be such a difficult task, depending on where you're at in your journey, changing up the way that you use your tools and also changing up which tools you use is a good way to go about it. All right, number 6 is actually intentionally seeking out inspiration. We have a lot of times there's not a specific thing that inspires us. It's just kind of a feeling we have, or a combination of things. I had a very good morning, I had a good day at work, or I felt like all day at work I was only thinking about making beats, or I had a very specific idea that I heard that I wanted to try. But for me, seeking out inspiration, I think the best way to do it is just listening. Active listening is one way to do it, but just listening in general. You can get in the habit of this by keeping a list on Spotify, Apple Music, whatever. Keep a playlist of music that other people have recommended for you, as well as music that represent the kind of music that you would ideally make. So those two are really good in combination with active listening and note-taking exercises while you're listening. So we talked about that several weeks ago, so you can check out the YouTube video about active listening. But for example, taking notes on which instruments, taking notes on where things are removed and added to the layers of instruments in the music. When the chorus was added, we got 3 more vocal layers, I heard. Or when the bridge started, I heard the guitar go out of the mix and instead there was a synthesizer. Things like that, as well as taking note of your mood and your emotional response to the music and anything and everything in between. What's the quality of the snare and kick drum relationship? What's the quality of the bass line? Is it sparse? Is it dense? Is it moving a lot? Is it just doubling the kick pattern? Is it doubling the guitar? Is it doubling another instrument in the mix? Being aware of all those things can help to activate your creativity in a way that will make you think about things in a new way. So that's seeking out inspiration. I think a very, very important one. I think a lot of us think of inspiration and motivation as something that just happens to us, but really it's something that we can seek out. If I'm not feeling motivated, there's a certain number of things that I could do to get me closer to being motivated. They're not 100% guaranteed to put me in a motivated state, but if I do these things, I'll be more likely to feel like I want to make music. And number 7, the simplest of all, is just take a break. If you've been making music nonstop for the past month, maybe take 2 days off, maybe take 3 days off. Whatever makes sense to you. I just took a week off last week, basically. I mean, I was working on music on Tuesday and Thursday, but for the stream, but it was my birthday on Monday last week. So I was just like, I can chill a little bit. And yeah, now I'm feeling good, feeling charged up. Also, it's important that we keep music as something, especially if we're trying to do this professionally or just be very intentional about it. It's important that we continue to enjoy it. You shouldn't play music just for somebody else's enjoyment if it's not actually, stirring something within you. So I would encourage you to find some way in that break time to turn music into something that's solely just for the joy of it, whether that's playing piano, whether that's making a new genre of music. I know that wouldn't really be like a break from making music, but it would be a break from what you've been usually doing. So I think that's a really effective way to get yourself out of beat block and other creative blocks when it comes to starting projects.